My name is Mike Kearley. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Centerra Bank in Sublette. Our bank has its origin in Santa Fe, Kansas, a town formerly situated just north of Sublette. Santa Fe State Bank opened for business on December 15th of 1906, capitalized by local ownership. In 1913, the Santa Fe State Bank moved to Sublette, the original building being moved to a site near the existing Farm Bureau building. In 1937, Frank McCoy promoted the consolidation of the Santa Fe State Bank, Satanta State Bank, and the Copeland State Bank to form one strong company. Later that year, the Haskell County State Bank was chartered in Sublette by the Banking Department of the state of Kansas. That charter has survived multiple ownership groups since, almost exclusively with local shareholders. The bank has enjoyed commercial success throughout the years, and its current ownership has been in place since December of 1986, operating as a locally owned independent community bank with total assets in excess of $300 million. We are proud to be a member of the community. The bank constructed its current building on Main Street in 1957, remodeled in '78, and again in 2001. A series of mergers and acquisitions led to a name change in April of 1999 to Centerra Bank. In addition to our bank in Sublette, we operate locations in Satanta, Greensburg, Dodge City, and Mineola. On behalf of Centerra Bank, I'd like to congratulate the community on its 100 years of existence.
In the early history of our county, there was a town called Santa Fe, and it was an exact center of the county. And it was a pretty thriving town of about 2,000 people at its peak, I believe.
And then the railroad came in, and the railroad missed Santa Fe. And as a result of that, two towns were formed, Sublette and Satanta.
And the railroad could ship in all kinds of food, lumber, everything that a town needed without much effort of putting it in wagons and moving it 5 or 6 miles. So really the railroad was the lifeblood of most small towns in most states in the Union at that time.
The railroad was a disappointment because I think the old timers really thought that railroad was going to come right down Main Street in old Santa Fe.
Decisions had to be made from people because that was a lifeline to a city.
It wasn't a fast transition. It wasn't like the railroad missed them and old Santa Fe disappeared. What also happened was homes from up at the Santa Fe area were moved in to both communities, actually.
Their idea was we have to do something to stay by the lifeline of our city. And when the railroad came through, I believe that's when they had to make some decisions. It was a very tedious and time-consuming move for them, but they felt like that was the best thing to do for their life.
When they moved from Santa Fe up here to Sublette, they had to use great big steam engines to move them. One building, a big hotel, they cut right in half. It's so heavy, if you can imagine that.
There was a house that was moved here that my great-grandmother lived in, and she did not want to move from Santa Fe, so they moved the house with her in it. She never left the house while they moved it from Santa Fe to Sublette.
And then the 30s hit, and the Depression, and a very trying time.
So if it's raining, everything is great. Everybody's growing something. Anybody can grow something, right? Okay, the minute it stops, then nobody can grow anything. And in our country, if nobody grows anything, it turns into a dust bowl.
Haskell County and Sublette in particular were right on the edge of what was known as no man's land, and really had the brunt of a lot of the dirt and the wind and the droughts like we're having right now. It was rough.
I don't know how they even survived, to be honest. in the early 30s, you would be in the house and you would just look to the north and we could just see this dirt coming, just rolling. As at that time, we just would have to hang curtains over the windows because we couldn't stay in most of the rooms because it was too dirty and couldn't breathe. We didn't have anything, neighbors didn't have anything, and everybody was in the same boat.
Paying your bills was tough, and a lot of farmers had to find a job to work part-time to pay their bills.
In the 40s, about mid-40s, probably irrigation started. They started drilling for water, and there was water there. And you've got to remember that in order to get that water, we had to pump it out. So the natural gas that they were finding at the same time fueled those engines to pump the water out.
Well, we're on the very east edge of the Hugoton natural gas field, which at one time back in the days was the largest natural gas field in the world. And the wells were shallow, 2,200 feet or less, and it was fairly easy to drill the wells, and it brought a lot of wealth to southwest Kansas.
83% of the taxes were paid by oil and gas in the whole county. So that made their taxes on real estate and vehicles low because of the huge amount that came in from the valuation on oil and gas.
Economically, I would say what it provided was good jobs,
which small towns needed. And then there was a few oil wells that were hit around, and still is, but it was really the natural gas industry that opened up the country, I guess you could say, to prosperity.
With the changes in water in this area, it drastically changed so many things. The way people lived, what they did for a living, how often they worked, where did they work. You know, it was a different place, literally, because of water.
There were a few wells out there, but all of a sudden it became gold to the people out here. It was something that needed to be mined, and they started mining for that water.
Of course, started out with open ditch, and you had to make sure that when you made a ditch, it didn't run uphill.
Flood irrigation was big in the early 70s to early 80s, okay? So these wells were pumping 2,000 gallons.
So as time went on, the sprinkler just made it way more efficient, the use of the water.
The advantage of the sprinkler was that we could water more acres more efficiently with a sprinkler system than flooding the ground.
It revolutionized farming. You could grow more lucrative crops such as corn as compared to just wheat.
At the advent of irrigation, the need for additional storage of grain became very apparent. So in the late 40s, early 50s, concrete elevators began to be constructed. The capacity at the co-op elevator is 7.1 million bushels undercover. The capacity undercover in the town is about 13 million bushel.
It's a need for new machinery and machinery salespeople to be there. There was repair people followed that, of course, and then you have the marketing and the hauling it out, and of course the railroad was that, but also you have the trucking industry that started, and then you have all this grain, and so you can feed livestock, and so you have livestock feeding operations that came about, and again, more jobs and everything because of that.
So all of a sudden, with irrigation and the combination of that with natural gas, a way to pump this water out of the ground and irrigate, we built other things. Feedlots came in, big.
Because cattle have to be fed, and in order to be fed, they have to have corn, they have to have product, they have to have molasses, they have to have things to go on. So you have to have the food for the cattle close by. If it's further away, it's going to cost more money to feed those cattle.
The areas that they were raising cattle to, for production, for beef, for the country, was Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, and that's where the packing plants were. And the closest that we had anything was maybe Emporia, Kansas. There was a plant back there.
And as it, the cattle feeding grew in the area, and then, packers came, of course, everything kind of just blew up from there. Haskell County, Kansas as a state is the second largest cattle feeding state, and Haskell County is the largest county within Kansas. So, obviously, there's a lot of reasons why, the cattle feeding ended up here. There's now 4 big packers, within a close period of range. There's close to 500,000 cattle on feed at, Haskell County if everybody's full. And, agriculture was directly responsible for, basically 52% of the whole gross economic part of Haskell County.
Without the feed yards, I don't know that we would have much community, because everything is based on ag around our community. So with the feed yards being there, they use up the local grain that they have here. They have employees, and they donate to the community. They help out in the school system,
So all that with the irrigation and the feedlots together, and then with the feedlots came the trucking industry to truck the animals to the slaughterhouses. And our town, I would say, prospered more than many other towns because of those 3 things right there.
Really, Haskell County was 3rd in the nation per capita income. This was one of the wealthiest places in the United States to be.
And it was invested in our schools, in our government buildings on Main Street, things like that.
The tax dollars were staying here in the community. Main Street was thriving for people.
But there was just an attitude of make things grow.
At that time, Sublette had a Chevrolet dealership. They had a bank, of course, and a men's clothing store. They had a women's clothing store. They had Knief's and they had Marie's.
At least 2 grocery stores. I think at certain times there were 2 drugstores. Variety store, like a 5 and dime type. Everything that a town needs to survive.
Then, because the livestock industry was growing so fast, then we had the influx of the packing plants too. We needed labor, and so we had a lot of immigrants, really hardworking folks. A lot of the Hispanic families came then, and they have stayed here and added to the richness of our communities.
A lot of the Spanish, Mexican people came for work because we're in an agricultural area. They came out here to work.
My mother's from Mexico, and my dad is from southern Texas. I was born in Beeville, Texas, and they were farm laborers. They did basically picked cotton. Then they proceeded to head towards southwest Kansas because the sugar beets.
My parents moved out to Sublette in 1980, and they came because Mexico's just a poor country. They didn't have much to offer. They couldn't get the necessities for my sister, so they came out here to build a better life for her and for themselves.
Then in the early 90s where way more German Mennonite people moved to this community. And it was due to lack of work and looking for making a better living. And also there was a lot of work available here. People were willing to hire and use workers and helpers. And some of them, and many of them, were also very good at what they were doing.
This community and even this area gave us a lot of opportunities and freedoms for that generation and for that culture to be themselves. And I think part of that is just the American dream. Sublette has kind of just been a door to live out the American dream, to better yourself, to be free. And I'd like to think that we had an impact in that and maybe sustaining or stabilizing the decline, even in the public schools and so on, helping to sustain and stabilize the decline of the small town size.
They're really adding to the quality of people that are here. And we had good quality people to begin with.
I mean, they contribute a significant amount to our communities. It makes me happy because we're growing and very diverse.
I know that I never felt like I was not welcomed. I never felt that way, and to this day I don't. I have incredibly fond memories.
And I know there's been some changes, and different people throughout time have moved here. But yet, in the beginning, they were all, when Sublette started, they were all immigrants from somewhere. We came in from different states, had different ideologies, we had different cultural ways, we had different ideas of how things should be run or whatever, but they learned to get together enough that we're going to just make it work.
What does Sublette mean to me, or what would I tell people about Sublette? I would say there's good people there. There's always going to be someone if you need something.
Hardworking people, they're kind people. When the chips are down, they show up to help each other.
The people in Sublette are very giving. If there's any kind of a disaster, or if there's some long-term illness, or anything that puts a family or person in jeopardy, I think people are just very quick to bring in food, to donate whatever they need. But it's just the way neighbors do. And you don't even have to know the people that well, but you're there.
My oldest child, a boy, was killed in a farm accident when he was 34 years old. And it was in September, just prior to harvest. And the way the community responded to that, to us as a family, was almost beyond description.
They're very, very, very kind. And as far as helping people, you're right about helping people, everybody. It's easy to help people you know, but the town does help people that they don't know.
Sublette is a very, very generous, giving, loving place. We have some great churches that really do practice what they preach.
We had a need within our church. In general, a church fundraiser, you normally just get your own people. But we had a business owner in town that actually donated a car for this fundraiser to support us and help us to be able to reach what we needed during that time.
And being here 30 years, I've seen a lot of that kind of help coming to people's rescue. Sometimes they know where the help comes from, sometimes they don't. And we just give God the glory for it. But that spirit is here.
For the future, Sublette, I think, is still very viable, and I think there's a saying that says those who cannot remember the past are destined to repeat it. But if in Sublette, if we'll remember the great things that happened in the past and what we did to become a community and to be viable and to be flexible and innovative and welcoming and caring and investing in people, then those are the things to remember to do, because that will help us to continue to grow and to be successful in a place that's like a refuge for families that want to come and have a great life with their families and their kids.
To me, Sublette stands above so many towns that I have seen in Kansas, that there were a lot of people that were not afraid to take a big risk, and they weren't afraid to fail. And I mean, it took expense to found feedlots and, build schools and go out on a limb and pass bond issues. And instead of griping about it, a lot of people just went forward and were forward thinking.
The people are so motivated to make improvements on their lives here for their next generation. That's what it's all about.
But to have survived 100 years, that is an awesome thing to think about. The things that the community has gone through, the difficulties, the economic difficulties, the other difficulties that go along with it, but yet to be able to still be here, I think that's a wonderful thing.